Right? So he apparently runs a fully fledged lab in his house. Dylan, is that correct?
Yeah. So,
so that's like that incubation.
all this is electronic parts and wires and everything.
So do you run honeypots as well from out of your house?
No, not now. Now it's
Okay.
mainly on like the electronics, the IoT devices,
Okay.
sensors,
Okay.
those kind of things. Yeah.
Sujit, you're good to start. You can take it ahead. Sorry, Russell, you're good to start.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Anush. Good evening, ladies and gents. Welcome back to Opinion Unlocked. This, of course, is season 2. Welcome back to today's episode. This, of course, is proudly brought to you by the Informatics Institute of Technology alongside Articulate Asia. So as always, today we have quite an interesting episode lined up. So I'd like to start off by introducing the theme of today's discussion. We have quite a mouthful. OG, can we talk about security in the era of Industry 4.0? So I would like to start off by introducing the panelists of today's discussion. Starting off, we have the director of XO Concepts Private Limited. We have Dilan Balgampaya. We have the general manager of Rockland Distilleries. We have Jani Ganeshan. And last but not least, we have the solution engineering director and evangelist at Sectrio APAC. We have Sharath Acharya. Good evening, ladies and gents. Welcome to today's show. And of course, I would like to introduce the amazing moderator of Opinion Unlocked as well. As always, we have the director of Layer 7 Seguro Consultoria. We have Sujit Christie. So I believe that does it for the intro. Sujit, with that, I would like to hand things over to you to take over.
Thank you, Razula, for that warm and nice introduction about my panelists and myself. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all the panelists for taking time to be here with us. I know the weather out there is wet, but I would like to get things warmed up here. Right? So we're going to talk about a subject which is not generally mainstream. Now, one of the things which I also see is we all talk about transformation triggered because of COVID, right? And a lot of time people say COVID has become the instrument or has been instrumental in getting organizations to transform. Now, sometimes what we fail to recognize is that the industries are interconnected, right? I mean, if you take a manufacturing plant, there are, machinery, there are, various other products, they're connected. There are controllers. But at some point in time, these information have to be captured and used for business decision making, or even to look at efficiency. So there's been this convergence, which has been happening for several years, which has also been a hot playing ground for the adversaries. So today, what we are going to discuss is we are trying to understand what is this Industry 4.0? What does that mean? And we're also trying to understand what are the challenges. One of the challenges, what we see is it's very ripe for the attackers to target these industries. It becomes an open playground. So while the organizations are carefully building their strategies to protect their IT infrastructure, they sometimes lose focus on the core, which actually is the bread and butter for the organizations. So with that brief introduction, I'm just going to shift focus to Dilan. I just you to tell us, okay, what is this Industry 4.0? Everybody is talking about, right? And I think for the past couple of years, people have been saying, this is the next industrial revolution, right? The fourth industrial revolution. Dilan, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sujit. So good evening to everyone. Yes, I think it's correct, right? It's the fourth industrial revolution. So like if we go back in time and see, right, we talk about the industry 1.0 now we call it industry 1.0 in hindsight, but it was the first industrial revolution and this was the automation. That is where everything started getting automated because of the introduction of steam power, right? Similarly, we talk about the second industrial revolution, where like mass production started happening because of electricity and assembly lines. The third industrial revolution, we talk about like late 1960s because of the like invention of microprocessors and computer systems. So the computerization is the third industrial revolution. And this is the fourth industrial revolution, where we talk about cyber physical systems, right? Connected systems, industrial Internet of Things, right? Additive manufacturing, that is like 3D printing kind of thing. Because like all in our history, like it was subtractive manufacturing that has happened. That means you get a block, you chip the things off, and then you arrive at a product. But now like there is a new area that we look at. So there is a lot of technologies involved in Industry 4.0. But if you look at it, Industry 4.0 is not a technology, it's sort of a concept, right? Just like automation was a concept in Industry 1.0, computerization was a concept in Industry 3.0. Industry 4.0 is a concept where all things within industries get connected, they communicate with each other and produce this data, right? So data is probably the most important thing that we talk about in Industry 4.0. So data gets accumulated through this Industry 4.0 things, and it gets to the proper places for decision making. So database decision making is something that we talk about in Industry 4.0. So if you look at the standards, right, Industry 4.0, it came out of the German initiative, but now it is like all over. So there are like about 4 design principles that we talk about in Industry 4.0, right? Interoperability. So interoperability is all things getting connected, right? Industrial systems, IT systems, devices, sensors, everything gets connected through networks, right? Different kinds of networks. Then the second point is information transparency, where we create what are called digital twins of factory floor. A digital twin of a factory floor is a representation of the factory floor inside the computer system, right? So this is where we talk about the information transparency. Then the third aspect of the design is design principles is the technical assistance, that is providing technical assistance to people, right? This could be through proper information at the correct times, maybe through AR, augmented reality glasses, showing them where to actually repair or what this particular part is. Likewise, or it could be like robotics helping people to do certain things. And the final point in the design principles is the decentralization of decisions. That means like you don't have to wait till the management makes decisions on the operation, right? You provide necessary decisions or data from the factory flow level to the top management level. So everyone, even the technician at the factory floor, will get his set of data so that he will be able to make decisions then and there without always having to go to a higher level. So decentralization of decisions, only the decisions that need to be made at the management gets actually into them, because everything else is actually supported by the data-driven decision making process, right? So this is the design concept, but in implementing Industry 4.0, and specifically since this topic is on in the security of it, right, we have to understand certain like nuances that is unique to the industries, right? So if you look at the industries, right, these are very well planned. Say if you look at a manufacturing industry, it's a very well planned industry, and everything is time bound, right? And work environments in these industries could be very harsh, like heat, dust, those kind of things. And so if we do not understand properly the industrial environments where the things will run, right, it becomes very difficult for us to work in hand with the industrial engineers, because there are so many different systems in these industries that we have to connect. So for example, right, there are like very different protocols that than what we are used to in IT, right? IT, we talk about SMTP, HTTP, those kind of things. But in industrial environments, you have so many different kinds of protocols, like say Modbus, CAN bus, BACnet, those kind of things, then Profinet, OPC, UA. So the way these networks work is different. And in IT, we talk about local area networks with Ethernet, Wi-Fi, those kind of things. But in industrial networks, those are also there. But then you have other protocols like say RS-485, RS-232, like different kinds of bus networks, not only Ethernet. So when we try to secure these implementations, right, where the machinery directly connects to the network, right, it becomes a very huge task to understand how these things actually work, right? And then the other thing is, now most of these systems, if you look at in industrial environments, those are implemented very isolating, right? So they do not actually connect to the existing networks, right? Because of that, those were very like secure for like decades, right? But now we are trying to bring in Industry 4.0, connect these things together. So we have to identify what kind of vulnerabilities there are. So there may be certain systems which ran for 20 years without any single patch or without any like antivirus or anything. But now we try to bring these things in. So I think this is sort of the thing that we are looking at in the industries, and these are sort of some of the challenges which I will probably talk about later. But hopefully I gave a very like quick introduction to what Industry 4.0 and some of the challenges that it brings. Sujit?
Very well articulated. You actually walked people through Industry 1.0 to where we are in terms of 4.0. Now, one word which caught my attention was you spoke a lot about decision making. And I think that is the core to any business. We should be able to make the decision, the right decision at the right time. Do we have the right information? So we have Jani here, right? And she comes from a process background, being an accountant, and worked in multiple environments, worked with telco, worked in manufacturing, still working in a manufacturing industry. So, Jani, the point what I'm trying to reflect and look at is, we heard from Dilan that we are looking at two different types of environments. One is IT, the other one is the manufacturing, automation, and all these things. So we are trying to see marrying these two systems together. And we need information readily available so that people can make the right decision at whatever level they are in. So what's coming out, or what is driving everybody towards that, is how quickly do we have, or how do we have the correct information real time? So when we have real-time information, we are also talking about understanding the process efficiencies, which will also result in process optimization. So when we look at from outside, sometimes we don't really see what actually happens in an organization, especially in a manufacturing unit. Now, if you worked with one of the leading brands, Elephant House, right? What we enjoy is the taste of those ice creams. But what actually happens inside the factory is special, isn't it? It's just like, trying to get that product in the same state as it was produced in the factory and put it into the supermarket so that we continue to enjoy that flavor. So do you see that appetite from the management to invest in this new technologies? When I say new technologies, in terms of automation, and also how do you see that information getting integrated with the mainstream information systems? Jan, over to you.
You are spot on there, Sujit. Now, I've been attached to manufacturing organizations for past 5+ years. So when I actually talk about the Internet of Things and its impact on manufacturing organizations, so from what I have seen, the underlying technology is driving rapid and continuous value for manufacturers across all sorts of verticals in the business. So these new information technologies are kind of not only impacting manufacturing effectiveness, but also provides kind of businesses the ability to identify the smarter ways to work. So if, as the head of business, if you can halve your production lead time through the new technological improvements, what else can you ask for as a manufacturer, isn't it? So from what has been proven in early stages of transformation, these interconnected factories and industrial organizations are reaping the benefits, particularly in terms of faster communication, visibility into operations, which is the key, and also increased capacities and far more benefits out there. And in simple terms, I would say this whole process, the technological advancements have improve the visibility with what's happening in your production flow, basically. As the head of the business, when the real-time production data are available, it gives me kind of the ability of making my teams accountable and connected, where problems are found quickly. It's just amazing as to how many systems and equipments and people, various people can be connected to form kind of a larger network. And there are so many areas of business that are immensely benefiting through these IoTs and new technological improvements. For an example, from out of my experience, if I talk about the improvements that can be made to inventory management, like I would like to touch upon on this example. So during the pandemic, if I talk about some of my sales channels were completely crashed. For an example, on-trade restaurant channel, obviously the restaurants were shut, and also people were reluctant to step out of house to have a glass of drink. However, on contrary, as opposed to that, we noticed that the modern trade retail arm is booming because people's preference was to go to the retail store and buy their choice of drink, then come home and enjoy their Friday evening kind of a thing. So we kind of had to change our entire product portfolio plans, as the types of products that are dominant in these two sales channels are completely different from each other. So we had to kind of change our production plans according to which our staffing requirements had to be changed, delivery plans, route plannings, and everything had to be changed. And all of these had to happen within a very short interval. Particularly, even the sourcing requirements had to be changed, where the supply chain function had to perform better to respond to these new requirements. And all these had to happen instantly. The insights given by these IoTs have been much helpful for us to run our business without an interruption. And also these technology-powered solutions like asset monitoring, these kind of techniques allow the managers to assess the productivity and make kind of fine decisions for higher product quality, and the real-time insights that are provided, they ultimately lead to cost efficiencies and contributing immensely up to the extent of increasing the revenue generated by the business. And particularly talking about the alcoholic beverages industry, where a major part of our annual sale is predominantly based on a couple of seasons in the year. So by any chance, losing the production capacity due to a machinery breakdown during a season, it would of course cost us a lot, which is not going to be affordable kind of. So where these technical advancements come into play, where they bridge the gap between the assets and the performance with the help of sophisticated sensitive, and also where the devices extract data to present a clearer picture of the asset's performance, where it also helps kind of interconnect the entire plant facility, and which gives kind of instant monitoring solutions to figure out the problems kind of. So the answer to your question, I would like to say is like, all these benefits that the manufacturing organizations have made our lives much easier during past period, and it's surely worth the investments, and a lot of manufacturing organizations are looking forward to this.
So what I heard from you is there's definitely benefits that can be quantified, right? So that is also driving in terms of customer satisfaction, right? Or having the product at the right time in the right place so that your channels can fulfill the requirements. And you also spoke something very interesting, which caught my attention. You talked about visibility, the assets, right? You know, what kind of assets which we have, what kind of performance they provide, and so on and so forth. And I'm just reminded about my previous panel discussion, Sharat. I mean, we concluded talking about people, process, and technology. Now, all what I heard from Jani is, while she spoke on multiple aspects, what connects everything is that process, right? She spoke about production planning, and she also spoke about sourcing planning, right? So for you to produce, you need to have a sourcing plan, and you need to have a strong supply chain. And you also need to ensure that you are able to detect problems early in the production line using technology, and it's available, right? I mean, even Dylan was indicating, right? I mean, there's so many flavors of technology which is being used, and how it is being used to interpret. So I want to shift the focus to an area where otherwise in IT, people talk about standards. Do we have standards which actually say these are the best practices we should adopt when looking at Industry 4.0? And how does, if there is a standard, what is it? And how does that standard help secure an organization? Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Sujit. That's a very interesting topic, right? So compliance and standards play a very important role when it comes to the whole the transformation journey itself. So we are looking at, as you rightly said, process, right? We are looking at a connected end-to-end value stream when it comes to Industry 4.0, and we are looking at completely digitalizing the shop floor and making sure that the data goes to the right place so that decisions can be made correctly. And we do have a lot of standards that have been written to actually help with this transformation. We have IEC 62443, ISA IEC 62443, which talks about security levels, right? They define it across 4 levels based on who is going to attack, what is the impact going to be, and all of that, with the basics that have to be put in place, and also specific parts of the shop floor which have to be looked upon before catering to digital transformation. So IC 62443 is one very interesting compliance body. So it's there are 2 bodies, that is ISA and IEC, who come together, and there is support by ISO 27000X, which specifically talks about IT, OT convergence as part of their compliance. So that becomes important. Other than these 2, there's ENISA, which is based out of Europe, which talks about a lot about IoT and how IoT can come into the whole transformation journey and what needs to be adhered to from a compliance perspective, and specific country specific compliances as well. For example, in India, we have something called as 1M2M, which takes care of compliance and standards when it comes to the IoT part of the implementations that are going on. So for any digital shop floor enhancement, it becomes very important that we follow these recommendations which are being created by industry experts. And these are not like these are groups in various parts of the country who've experienced various stages of transformation, and they've come up with recommendations which go into these compliances.
Sharat.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we tend to think standards are only for certain segments of an organization, right? And I'm also quite slowly will shift this discussion to Jani as well. When you talk to the accountants, they talk about accounting standards, right? So they're driven by compliance, right? They will worry about regulatory compliance, right? Now with this pandemic, we would also talk about health-related compliance, right? But a lot of times, when it comes to technology, IT department is in the center of attention. If you're a part of a large organization, or if you're part of a BPO, or if you're a software development company, then they would say, okay, are you complying to ISO 9000? Are you complying to 27000, ISO 20000? And today we are hearing about standards which are, aiming at the industry 4.0. You spoke about the ISA, IEC, ENISA, and so many of them, right? So, Shani, I'm going to ask you a question which I'm sure everybody else out there would also want to ask you, right? Typically, when it comes to IT, the IT function will report typically to a finance function, unless otherwise they are an IT organization, right? So in general, at large, we would only see the head of IT, the CIO, still reporting to the head of finance or the group finance director or somebody at that level, right? Now, we also heard in our conversation today that there's so much of IT being used in the production environment or the shop floors. How do you propose, or what do you see should be the governance mechanism? And what should the organization should be looking at? Your views, Jani. Let's hear from you.
So Sujit, information technology has been critical to almost every type of business. So it is also a very specialized field, which means that the CIO of the business must be able to understand the business requirements and also to make their challenges understandable to other senior leaders of the business without going into too much of technical details of their perspective. So in my view, they should be able to talk in a common and understandable language at first. So my viewpoint about IT function being under the purview of finance is I would like to talk about it in a couple of aspects when it comes to this particular area. So IT, just like finance, is ultimately a corporate service providing unit. And the balancing the heart of a customer servant with being kind of a good corporate steward is important for both the functions. So having kind of a similar DNA, I would say having the balance between the two functions can surely help the efforts of both the units work well together. That is one aspect of it. And also, IT functions are typically big spenders, as all of you would agree, and IT spending is often analyzed with ROI frameworks. So as you would agree with me, we as finance people, we always pretty good at managing these type of things. And having said that, it is important for finance teams also to avoid just being focused on the numbers, that they lose sight of important qualitative factors or the bigger picture of what the company is trying to achieve through the technological advancement. And also, IT is most likely get the most attention from the CFO as opposed to the CEO or COO. Of course, it's simply because that CEO tends to live in the future and focus on the vision. where COO will be tend to be more focusing on day-to-day tactics of the business and keeping the stuff going on. So IT is arguably a function in between both these spaces, where both long-term strategic aspect as well as the day-to-day operations also are equally important when it comes to IT function. So a good head of finance, a good CFO kind of should be able to relate to this aspect and drive the function is kind of my view on this. But having said all of the above, the two teams can collide at times also, because on the surface it seems to be the two teams seems to be functioning towards two different paths. However, with finance function itself being moving towards automation in recent past, I believe that this will give better opportunities to interconnect and kind of leverage, focus on developing solutions that will enhance business performance altogether. After all, IT solutions need to be financially solid and benefiting the organization. So I do understand some of the solutions could be quality driven for sure, but even the quality driven improvements, at some point they should be showcased in the numbers in some long run aspect. So this is a more stronger reason for IT function to report to CFO or the head of finance. Certainly, it depends on the line of thinking of the business organization as well. Because when it comes to certain business organizations, the CIO to CFO reporting relationship actually makes sense, but in some cases it might not be, have to agree to that. So basically, my viewpoint about this is finance is the language of business. It's much important for the CIO to know that language for better decision making, irrespective whether the CIO work in isolation or with finance. So my view is knowing this language is extremely important for the success of the entire function. However, how it would be lined up is it would be depend on the line of thinking of the entire business organization. Sujit, over to you.
Jenny, I have a follow-up question for you. Right before I go to Dylan, I want to ask you this question. IT, yes, today they come under the purview of the finance team, right? The CFO or somebody who is responsible for finance, or in some cases the CEO.
Yeah.
The manufacturing team, the production team, they also use technology. You can call it IT, but it does specific, unique functions. Do they report to the CFO? Or should they be reporting to the CFO?
So when it comes to factory also, there is a different line of operational finance aspect as well. So when it comes to operational finance, the line of reporting in most of the organization, it falls under the purview of the CFO when it comes to operational finance. So when it comes to finance, this management and financial accounting aspect, the people who are sitting in the head office is one line of finance, whereas the operational finance, people who are sitting at the factory and who get involved with day-to-day operational matters, they also ultimately fall under the purview of CFO in many organizations.
Thank you. You actually set the stage for me to go and ask the question from Dylan. You've been on the ground for several years. You've been more or less living on the production floor, right? And I know we were having our own chat and we were sharing our own notes, our experiences, right? While we see that there is a greater adoption of automation and so on and so forth, I've seen, right? I mean, in my experience, like I remember I was rolling out a Wi-Fi solution in an automobile plant, right? So we were trying to capture the data, real-time data from the production lines. So people said, piece of cake. Just mount the Wi-Fi access points on the railings and you'll get the data. So they went and did it. And a few minutes later, the data was corrupted, right? I mean, some were coming in, some were not coming in because there was interference. So my question to you, Dilan, right? One, in terms of, trying to converge OT and IT. Do people talk a common language? Does everybody in the organization talk the same language? Because Jani mentioned that finance is the language of business. How do two diverse technologies communicate? What are the challenges? Dila, over to you.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Sujit, right? Now, this is the challenge we see, right? Now, IT, from IT organizations, now we see, right, have very matured processes now, right? We have gone through the ISO 27001, we have done the policies, procedures, we have the steering committees, the risk assessments are done. So everything almost happens in a like methodical manner, right? But what we see is when it comes to these manufacturing organizations, right? Still, it is not the same, right? The OT part, operational technology part of the manufacturing organizations have not actually reached there, right? And in most cases, what we see is there is a larger disconnect between the IT and the OT. So IT would go and very happily manage their own networks, but they don't want to manage or get involved in the OT networks. Now, when I say OT networks, right, say a factory, they will have hundreds of different kinds of machines. Each of these machines may be controlled by separate systems, right? Very proprietary systems. Sometimes the protocols are also proprietary, not even documented. You cannot find how the protocols work, right? It's very different than IT environment. With IT environment, the protocols are standard. We know how protocols work, but in these cases, a lot of proprietary things. But the thing is, if by any chance, right, the compromise happens in one of these systems which control a mission critical part of the operation, right, that entire mission critical part could go down, which means, right, if the IT security people do not look at these systems from security perspective, right, the entire operation, say IT could have all their systems running hunky-dory without any issue, like everything compliant, but any of these things fail, right? It is the bread and butter of the organization. The entire delivery chain comes to a stop. This is why it is very important to IT to get involved with the OT networks, right? There will be a lot of differences of thinking, but this is not only here, right? I think even worldwide, this is the case. We see very mission critical systems implemented by international vendors coming here, right? Without even credentials. Username, password is not there, right? Because these systems have been isolated for so long, right? 20 years, 15 years, these have been running, as I earlier mentioned, without single pack, a virus guard, or username or password. But the moment you try to connect these things together, right, all these issues come into it. So from an IT security perspective, we have to understand the nuances there. We cannot go and say, okay, your system does not have a username and password, shut it down because it violates our security policies and procedures, right? We have different kinds of controls in security, right? We talk about preventive controls, detective controls, corrective controls, compensating controls. We talk about risk assessment. So all these things, trying to bring in security into the OT world, has to be along these paths. You do proper risk assessments, identify what risks are there, do the risk grids, do the risk treatments, and then slowly go and implement these things without, I highlight this, without disrupting the operations, right? You cannot do that because that is the bread and butter. So over to you.
So there's much happening out there, which meets the eye, isn't it? Right. So sometimes we see everything is fine, but it is in isolation. I mean, what went through my mind is it's like, as long as people are single and on their own, everything is fine. But when they get married, then they start to see that friction coming in, right? It's just like, adjusting whether you give in or you give up, right? So I guess it's most of the time, it is like a compromise in OT, right? You give up or you give in so that you could get the production, without getting interrupted. So, Sharath, I'm just wanting to ask you, right? So you cover a large market here, right? Your APAC, so to say. So when we look at the subcontinent, probably we may be still following what's happening elsewhere. If you look at what happened in Japan or what's happening in Korea, or even Singapore, that matter. Like, we're looking at different maturity levels. Now, Dylan also mentioned, right? Systems without passwords, isolated, no proper controls in place. So when he was saying there are no proper controls in place, that means there may not even have a process in place, right? So it might be just, standalone, which actually works, right? So everything is an island by itself. What is the way forward? What are people doing out there to bring sanity to this whole madness?
So as you rightly said, right, there are two types of islands are the right word. So there are two different types of, especially in manufacturing, when you're talking about it. There is discrete manufacturing, which is there are these islands and they separately have their own process, their own procurement of technology, their own procurement of anything to do with SCADA and ICS. And there is these conveyor belt kind of manufacturing, right, where everything is continuous and you can still have some kind of IoT which you can put on it. But in these islands, one very important thing would be the visibility to the assets which are there on the shop floor, right? Is what you can see, is what you can secure, is what we need to go by, right? And when IT teams or IT CISO organization, which was always looking after IT security, and now they're suddenly introduced to this new beast, which has been running for multiple years on its own, and nobody has looked at processes, like you said, or have documented anything, simple things like a network topology diagram, right? Where IT takes it for granted that if I'm connecting 100 computers together, I know how exactly the LAN is drawn out. How do I need to lay down the computers, the servers, which room, what, everything is drawn out. But in OT, because it's like an empire that has been built over many years, and there are many people who came in and went out, but what has not happened is that process documentation and the whole networking part of it. And today when ISA 95 speaks about the controller network, and then the uh, WAN, and then the process network, and the operation network, and then the enterprise network, it's very easy and nice to have that as a recommendation. And I think what we are seeing on ground is there is SCADA, but the next thing they go for is, okay, before Industry 4.0, I need an ERP system, which gives me information. But what about MES? Why people are not going for MES solutions? And these are the challenges that we're seeing. And when it comes to visibility, what people are now doing is they take a plant, which will be the idle plant, for them to do all the sandboxing, them to do all the exercises when it comes to finding out what is connected, what are the gaps in the processes, doing a gap assessment, and then like Mr. Dilan said, a risk assessment, and then find out, does this shop floor need updates on their Windows systems, right? Windows is being used on IT side as well, but Windows being used here are not updated because they don't want to impact the operations. And that's why they've kept the system as is. Some things running on Windows XP, not upgraded to the latest supported Windows version. And application control is not in place. And there are things like you need to put in USB restrictions onto PLCs and the computers that are running in the shop floor. And there are things like patch update servers, which have to be put in the DMZ, but not in place. So patches cannot be run. OEMs can support, but the shop floor doesn't want to take full support because they're scared that the operations would come down. So there are these lot of these challenges that we are seeing, but a very good change that we are seeing is the digital transformation is driving the importance of security into the shop floor. So the CISO organization is drafting an entire roadmap of each and every brick that has to be put in place to build the whole building. And then they are counting that, okay, this is the first step that I'm going to take. And with these, I'm going to finish checklist ABC and then put in the security solutions, which actually helps with my asset visibility, which gives me visibility into attributes, visibility into firmware and software that the assets are running, what are the patches that are required, how should the network be segregated. All of that information is what they are putting into these drafts. And we are seeing a change, like in matured countries like Japan, Singapore, they're a little advanced, they know what are the gaps, and they're implementing solutions faster. Whereas we are seeing larger industries in the India SAARC region where they are also in a mature stage, but small and medium sized industries are now drafting the whole OT security roadmap. And that's a very, very interesting change that we have seen. And the main driver to it is Industry 4.0.
Sharath, several aspects, right? So you're also touching on the same points in a different aspect, which Dilan was talking about. He was talking about controls. He was talking about risk management, right? So we've also seen, right? I mean, I was just thinking through, like when you were talking about the dangers of not having the right controls, right? So 2010, we had Stuxnet. And it brought down the nuclear plants in the Middle East, right? I mean, for me, is something you can't just go and bomb that place off. So the only way you can do is to slow down the process. So they went and targeted the centrifuges. Then 2012, Shanun in Saudi Arabia, right? 2015, we had the Black Energy, right? That was more to do with the Ukrainian power plant outage, right? And that was not once, twice, right? And same way, we had 2017 Shanun again, targeting the second round of attacks in Saudi Arabia. And then recent times, when we were all locked down, we had the Colonial Pipeline attack, right? And then we were talking about ransomware, right? And it is big business for the attackers. So while we, talk about the good aspects, like, that it brings productivity, efficiency to the business so that you can improve your top line, you can improve your bottom line. Our organizations, so Johnny, I'm just trying to shift focus to you very quickly, right? Our organizations really focusing on the threats when you do your enterprise risk management, or is it just limited to one aspect of the organization? I would like to hear from you. What should be the organizations in general in Sri Lanka should be looking at when they're looking at the enterprise risk management?
Yeah, so basically, when it comes to this risk management approach, there's no way that the businesses could actually compromise on the controls and the ways and the mechanisms that they use to mitigate the risks has to be stronger enough. And in my organization, when it comes to this element of risk management, and we have proper protocols of identifying the risk areas, multiple areas, when it starting from the operational areas, financial management, and various aspects of the business, including people to processors to all the aspects of the business. And we follow that proper protocol when it comes to identifying the area, as well as when we are setting up what could be the actions that need to be taken in case of a possible threat, and who are those stakeholders who will be in charge, or who will be responsible for taking the remedial actions. So as you correctly said, the risk management approach, irrespective of these new technological advancements that are happening in the business, which is inevitable, like we all are running at a very faster pace, which cannot be actually changed. And having said that, we should not be actually compromising on any risk elements of the business, and there should be proper focus given by the management on all areas of the business when it comes to the risk management elements.
So risk element has to be managed, and that's to be continuously evaluated. So there's no escape from that, isn't it?
That's right.
So what I also keep telling my peers and my clients whenever I interact with them, we may not experience an issue. We may not even be aware that problem exists in our network. But do we actually look out of the window and see what's happening in the neighborhood? Now, typically in the physical world, if our neighbor gets robbed, we quickly do a check in our homes and then, get everybody prepared to counter that threat. But do organizations do that? So that's a question I'm still trying to find the answer. And very quickly, I want to move to Dilan and then to Sharat to wrap up the session. Dilan, very quickly, do we have skills? Do we have people who can do all what we are talking about?
Okay, that's a good question. From a security perspective, Sujit, what I see is, right, we have a lot of professionals who are like very conversant on aspects like ISO 27001 and even the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? So the security concepts, the knowledge and implementation is there, right? But as I said, when it comes to OT, it requires understanding a different set of like operational aspects, a different set of protocols, different set of systems, different set of operations. So as Sharat earlier mentioned, the IEC 62443 standard, right? It actually has thought about these things. And like, I think for professionals to learn something like that and come up with the necessary skills, like could be done, right? But I see there is a huge gap in that. This is a very new thing, but that standard, if you look at it from a perspective of life cycle management, from a perspective of integration, from a perspective of owners' requirements, right? Those things are there. So security professionals who are proficient in these standards, it will be easy, but there is a new set of skills that they need to learn. So they should be willing to go into the factory floors and identify how these systems operate, talk with the engineering, identify the challenges. So yes, if that can be done, right, within a matter of like a few years, we would probably have a very good cybersecurity people who will be able to work across the OT as well as the IT as well as the OT areas.
That convergence has to be managed.
That has to be.
We can tame the technology, but we need people with skills, experience, and knowledge. Right? So
they should be willing to learn.
Willing to learn, absolutely. And we are up against the time, right? Because if we are still using technologies which were available in 2010, and if we are seeing sophisticated attacks and the attackers demanding ransom, do we have people who can actually recognize and advise the management, the steps to be taken to remediate or mitigate that risk. Sharath, very quickly, right? I mean, we have a few minutes to wrap up the webinar. Can the tools manage the risk?
To a large extent, yes, right? Because a lot of, so each of these tools which are helping people and the process, that is technology helping the people and the process, have been thought through when they're being built, right? And these tools are being built by experts to ease out the jobs that were manually being done by the people or by process being put in place, right? So there are 5 key things that we need to think about how tools can help. First, it can help with prediction of what might go wrong when a cyber attack happens, right? Or when can a cyber attack happen? Second thing is prevention. You can put all the risk mitigation strategies in place using these tools to actually prevent attacks. There might be some attacks which slips through, and that's why you need a detection mechanism by putting in an intrusion detection system or advanced firewalls. All of this you need to put into do the detection part of it. Then comes the compliance, right? Where you're sticking to the mandates and then going by a checklist provided by these compliances, and also sticking to local and global compliances which are necessary for if you're an OEM and you're releasing your products to another company as well. And finally comes remediation and recovery, because in the end, the time to recovery is the most important thing when it comes to an operations shop floor. So tools are being built to cater to this framework, to cater to vulnerability management, to cater to risk mitigation, to cater to incidents response, and to cater to remediation and recovery. So I think tools are there. It's just that people have to be trained on these tools, and that would take a little bit of time, but there are experts who can train people on these tools as well.
So what I'm hearing from you is the tools can meet halfway through. The rest of it is people dependent, right? So it's been a very interesting, thought-provoking session. So for me, my priorities coming out of this session, number one, quest for governance, right? I think that's utmost. So if we fix that jigsaw, we will ensure productivity, time to market. We may even, be looking at net zero, right? We are talking about energy efficient processes, right? And also we will be in a position to innovate. But having said all this, there are also business challenges, right? Networking, like what all of you said, right? IT and OT, convergence. How do we marry these two? How do we make best use of it? How do we manage the risk? Then what we did not discuss today, or maybe we would discuss in a different panel, is the cloud enablement. Today, everything is provisioned in the cloud. So we can be running a factory physically on the ground, but the platforms are in the cloud. So how do we leverage that technology? Big data, for example. Analytics. And how do we build a framework to secure all this infrastructure? So as you rightly said, technology will definitely be an enabler. And I'm sure, Johnny, you would have actually seen a lot of benefit coming off of process automation, right? And that's the end result, right? So you see it in dollars and cents. But I guess there's a lot more to achieve. Right. So with that note, I would like to thank all of you for being with me today to talk about this interesting subject, Industry 4.0. And before I say goodbye to you, we would be having the next episode, that will be the last episode for season 2, and that's going to be on cyber insurance. Right. We're going to get some very interesting panelists to discuss the need for cyber insurances and maybe even discuss the nonsense of the the survey insurance. So with that note, I would like to hand the session over to Rasula. Rasula, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sujit, for handing things back over to me. So, ladies and gents, that we have it. That brings to a conclusion episode 3 of season 2 of Opinion Unlocked. I would like to start off by thanking the amazing panelists of today's show. We have Dilan, we have Johnny, and we have Sharat. Thank you so much for being a part of today's discussion. It was quite enlightening. It was quite, it was amazing to have you on board today's show. And as always, Sujit, thank you for moderating today's discussion. Thank you for taking this course on its way, and thank you for engaging with everyone, and thank you for making it the conversation that it was today. So as Sujit rightfully mentioned, next week, of course, will be the final episode of season 2 of Opinion Unlocked. So we would like to warmly welcome all of you to be a part of that episode as well. And I believe with that, we can actually call it a day for today and meet next week. And I would like to remind everyone that this, of course, is proudly brought to you by the Informatics Institute of Technology, and it is collaborated by Articulate Asia. So we will meet once again next week. So until then, please do stay safe and have an amazing week ahead as well. So with that, we can call it a day. So good evening, everyone, and we will meet you next week.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.